This is the chapter 14 segment 4 outline. This is the end of the chapter on personality, and the first big topic we're going to be discussing is whether or not personality is stable across situations. So this raises the person in the situation debate, which is the question of whether behavior can be better explained by a person's internal characteristics or by the surroundings. So there's been a lot of experimentation on whether somebody's personality can be better explained by the situations that they're in. And in different experiments, they found variability in people's expression of the big 5 factors, depending on the situation they were in. And in other words, you could more accurately predict what a person would do if you knew the situation than if you knew who that person was. So apparently, if you observe someone in many different situations, you can find ways in which that person behaves consistently. So even though certain aspects of their personality may be different, you usually find consistencies. Even, for example, someone who may be more extroverted may not talk as much at a business meeting as much as they would at a party. And this shows the importance of the situation for affecting behavior. But if someone is the most talkative person in both situations, this suggests that that their personality, especially in extroversion, matters too. And this goes into interactionists, who are personality psychologists who acknowledge the importance of the situation and assessing current behavior, and the importance of personality in understanding someone's average behavior. So most personality psychologists today do identify as interactionists, and they try and understand the behavior displayed at the moment, but also understanding someone's average behavior over days, weeks, years. So this interactionist perspective acknowledges that there are some situations in which almost everyone behaves the same. So an example the book gives is hostages on a hijacked plane, for example. But there's also just situations where personality counts for very little. So in a shopping mall, for example, people may obviously do very different things. One person, if they know they have to buy one thing, goes right to that store and buys it and goes home, where another person may take their time shopping. And this is kind of interactionist big question in seeing how personality becomes different based on the environment people are in. So the last big section of the chapter is discussing social influences on personality, and the main question is what shapes the development of the big 5 personality traits. So we can see that the temperament of babies offers some prediction of what their adults personality scores will be like for some of the big 5, but not all. And from twin studies, we know that genes play a role in forming each of the big 5, but the data isn't always clear, and that genes alone cannot account for any of the big 5 traits. So a big thing is looking at how personality develops under environmental influences. So the most prominent environmental feature for a growing child is the people that they're around. And many researchers are now looking at social influences on behavior. So the final section is about social learning. So social learning is changes in behavior brought about by interacting with other individuals. Now there's 3 different perspectives to help understand social contributions to the developing personality. There's first the behaviorist angle, there's then the cognitive perspective, and then finally we'll look at cultural influences and how that affects our behavior and our personality. So the first one we're going to talk about is behaviorism, and behavioral approaches emphasize overt behavior and rewards. So the biggest explanation the biggest explanation of personality development for behaviorists is the interactions between a parent and a child. And behaviorists only care about observable behavior. So behaviorists like to examine contingencies, which are events that happen after an individual displays a behavior, to determine whether or not it is being reinforced. So from the behaviorist perspective, any behavior that is common might be getting reinforced, and if it's undesirable, then the trick is to determine what exactly is reinforcing the behavior and trying to eliminate that reinforcement. So, for example, if a child often misbehaves, he may do so because it gets his parents' attention which he finds reinforcing, even if they are scolding him. If instead of scolding him, the parents ignored him, this misbehavior may go away. So, we're obviously going back to B.F. Skinner, we're going to talk about response tendencies. So, according to the behaviorist perspective, particular ways of reacting to various situations based on past learning experiences, which together form the personality. So, although Skinner believed learning experiences during childhood shape response tendencies, he also believed it was always possible to learn new response tendencies even as an adult. So in other words, he did not conceive of personality as a lifelong, unchanging characteristic of a person. So he didn't believe in consistency in an individual's personality. But however, behaviorists kind of lost the campaign to explain personality. This kind of was brought about by more evidence that personality traits are heritable, and behaviorists couldn't really find an explanation for that relating to how they approach things. And also, they mainly disregarded mental processes. So they didn't even discuss how personality affects our thinking. So this goes into cognitive psychology, which is perceptions of control and competency shape a developing personality. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is locus of control, which is the individual's perception about whether his or her efforts in life will be reinforced. So as with many personality types, there's a scale. So the locus of control, there's internal and external. So people with an internal locus of control perceive themselves to be in control of whether they will receive reinforcements for their efforts. They feel in charge of their fate. Whereas somebody with external locus of control, they perceive in reinforcements as due to chance or luck. So they believe that their efforts will have little effect on their future, and they do not feel in charge of their life. This then can be coupled with self-efficacy. So this is a term talking about the belief that you are capable, that you have the ability to succeed and to master a particular situation. So in other words, self-efficacy is the belief that you are effective and that you have the ability to succeed and that you can master a particular situation. This requires internal locus of control because you have to believe your efforts matter in order to try. But self-efficacy isn't just having an internal locus of control. It is also the confidence that you will be successful as you tackle progressively greater challenges growing up. So self-efficacy, how it's explained in a child, is if the child is not without self-efficacy, the child will avoid new situations and challenges and therefore fail to reach his or her full potential in a happy life. And this is related back to self-actualization. being the best and happiest human someone can be, and Maslow's ideas of hierarchy of needs. And then the theory of self-efficacy is a social theory since it hinges on social learning. And social modeling is the tendency of individuals to mimic the behavior of others. And the concept of self-efficacy is actually not just a social theory, but also a cognitive theory. Because the most important question is not just whether the child becomes competent and successful, but whether that child actually perceives themselves as being competent and successful. And this is very closely tied to ideas of self-esteem. In terms of big 5 personality types, people lacking self-efficacy will be less open to experience, they avoid new challenges, less extroverted, so they avoid meeting new people in new situations, and more neurotic, so less able to handle minor setbacks. And people with low self-efficacy may or may not display those characteristics, depending on other factors, including their genetics and the genes that they've inherited. One last theory to explain how genes in a social environment both affect an individual's behavior is reciprocal determinism. So this is a theory that has 3 different factors that mutually influence one another. So there's personal factors, which include the individual's genes, experience, and personality. Environmental factors, including contingencies that affect learning in other people, and the individual's behavior. So reciprocal determination acknowledges the importance of both genetic factors and social factors. And it's a reciprocal relationship, so they all work off one another. And the last sort of area when we're talking about social learning is we're going to talk about cross-cultural psychology, which tries to compare different cultures, asking how people from one culture differ on average from people in another culture. So, for example, in traditional cultures such as Arab nations that follow strict Muslim laws or hunter-gatherer societies such as the African Bushmen, almost everyone scores low on openness compared with people in more westernized cultures. So we can obviously see cultural, between cultures, behavioral differences in personality. And this may be due to differences in how people are raised. So, in fact, bilingual Hong Kong students, when they moved to the United States, their big 5 traits became more in line with U.S. values every year that they were here. So it's thought that it's mainly due to the environment in which someone grew up in and their culture. So differences between culture is the main one that is discussed in the book is that kind of talking about individualist versus collective societies. So there's a very strong pro-individualism sentiment in U.S. culture, while in many Asian cultures, they place a greater emphasis on collectivism and the notion that people should work closely together and share the results and credit for those efforts. So attitudes concerning individualism and collectivism are reflected primarily in the dimension of extroversion. So, specifically, people from individualist cultures tend to be more extroverted than people from collectivist cultures. Finally, real quick, the book goes back to Phineas Gage, and the source of his personality difference is now fully known today. It's clear that there is damages to the frontal lobes of his cortex, and neurologists recognize today this is important for inhibiting impulsive behavior, which can explain his difference of after his accident. He was a lot more impulsive, irritable, and vulgar, and this often takes long to mature, so this can explain the irrational behavior of teenagers.